oftentimes when we are in conversation, we are preparing our response to the other. And I, first of all, want to normalize that, because it's like a ping pong game and we don't know when the ball's going to come towards us. And there's almost a vulnerability around, like, I want to make sure the other person knows that I was with them and I've been following them and I have something to say back to what they said. Or there's the feeling of like, okay, they've been talking for a while and their ideas are triggering ideas in me. And I really want to share that. Right? I really want to share that. So I'm just waiting for that opening to, and I don't want to forget it. So part of my mind is like looping around, okay, don't forget this, don't forget this, don't forget this, so that I can bring it in. But here's what happens is we lose connection when we're trying to do two things at the same time. And it's fatiguing. It's fatiguing for us. And then when it is our turn, when we come to say what we've been wanting to say, oftentimes it's not even congruent with where the other person is anymore. And so the disconnection is felt even deeper. So I want to move us into another aspect, which for me is an edge, which is interruption. Because one of the reasons we feel an anxiety around wanting to say something or remember things is because we feel like we won't get our turn. And this is often, it happens because we have differences in communication styles, where some people are much more comfortable speaking and can speak uninterrupted for very long periods of time, whereas other people have a preference for listening, but it comes at the cost of them being able to self-express. And one of the things that we can do, in particular, if you fall on the camp of being more a listener, which is my case, is to learn how to interrupt with care. And the interruption is important because, one, it's setting a boundary. We talked about this last night, how important setting boundaries are, that we don't go over threshold. Being in conversation is a way for us to meet our needs for mattering. And if the other person is speaking and not tracking their impact on us, we feel like we don't matter. We feel like we're not being seen. And then we let it go too long and we get the biofeedback of resentment or anger. And at that point, we shut down and we don't want to talk to that other person again. And it's our responsibility as the listener to speak up and let the other person know what our impact is, because they're not noticing it. They're unconscious. And to a certain degree, it's not their fault if they're unconscious. If they are aware and they continue doing that, then that really is a transgression. But if they're unaware because they're caught up in the content of their story, then we can't fault them. So how can we interrupt with grace? And this is definitely not something that we're going to be able to complete today. We'll come back on Thursday and practice this. But what are some ways that we can interrupt so that we are not breaking connection with the other? And what I have found, if the person is really sped up and I cannot even put the words for interruption, I just put my hand up, because that will flag their attention. And if they're unaware, I'll put the hand right in front of their face. And that will cause them to stop. And that break in the momentum of what they're saying will allow them to become more present. And then I will follow up with a statement of transparency. I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed with the amount of information I'm receiving. Or I'm noticing myself getting frustrated because I want to speak too. It's not going to be necessarily graceful when we do it, because probably by the time we interrupt, we're already past threshold. If we don't know what to say, we could just be like, hey, can we just have a pause? And that buys you time to come back into your body, assess, self-connect, assess what am I wanting? What am I needing? And how can I articulate that in a way that is connecting to the other person? So when I come out of my pause, I can share. I've noticed that the weight of this conversation has been with you. And what I'm wanting is equity. And I'd like to have some of that weight come back to me. And that's all we say. And we wait to see what the impact is on the other person. Right? So we don't have to make a solid boundary of like, hey, if we want to have a dialogue, then there needs to be equity. And I don't feel like I'm being heard and seen. Those are all true. But what I'm doing is I'm coming up with a strategy for both of us of how we need to navigate conversation. There's not collaboration. There isn't full buy-in. It's a boundary, which is a no. Like if you don't do it my way, I don't want to engage anymore. Do you see how that's not connecting? And then oftentimes the other person isn't even aware. So the level of our reaction is disproportionate to the trigger. And for them, it's confusing. Like, whoa, why are you so mad right now? And if that's showing up in our request for pausing, they're going to just hear that. They're not going to hear what we're saying. They're going to pick up on the motivation or the tone. And that's going to cause defensiveness and also like disconnection. Validate how in our culture, it's not looked upon as okay to interrupt. I mean, I know for sure in my upbringing, I was explicitly told to never interrupt, which is why I don't interrupt. And if I did, I was punished. So we all have different wounding around that. And I think it's important for those of us that have the tendency to speak a lot to hear from those that have the wounding around not being able to interrupt or that default into listening, to just have an awareness that we all have different modalities of being. And it's really important to track our impact. And I would say even it's really important to get consent before offloading everything that's in your mind onto the other person, right? Checking in of like, hey, I'm feeling really excited about this thing. Do you have the capacity to hold my energy? Because the last thing as a speaker that we want is to find out that the person has been listening to us for half an hour and just wanting to die. I mean, that's so hurtful. Or that we generated dysregulation in another person just by being excited about something. That's really painful. So really, it's the responsibility of both of us as the speaker and as the listener to be present, to notice what our impact is, if our ethics is of non-harm, as well as to know that not everyone is present in conversation. So if I am, the responsibility actually is on me to be able to step up and get us both into a place where there's presence. Or we can have the choice of like, I just don't talk to that person anymore. But then what are we doing with our lives? We're cutting down options for connection. It's going to be awkward interrupting. And what I'd like you to do for Thursday is to start thinking about what would be a way for you to interrupt. And I also want you to study yourself as when you're going into conversations with others, what's your impact on the other? Are they wanting to interrupt, but they haven't because they don't want to hurt our feelings? Are they with us? And one of the things that allows us to track is slowing down. Right? We're back to the basics. Slow it down, notice, pause. Offering the pause is a way of, one, coming back into my body, but also giving a chance for the other to be able to interrupt without it feeling like it's an interruption. Any questions or closing comments about today? Yeah, play around with this and also start noticing what your tendencies are. and seeing what the impact is on other people.